What's up folks, CrushSG back with another Palworld video. I know, my cyberpunk folk out there are waiting on the Git showcase. At time of editing this video, Baba Booey still hasn't uploaded the update, but I do know it's coming soon considering the mod has been taken down. That's usually an indication that Baba Booey is gonna drop an update soon. Once the update drops, I'll get on it and hopefully have the showcase out within a week or so of that. Again, I'm pretty busy these days, so I'm trying my best here, folks. Anyway, in today's Palworld video, I'm going to be talking about the player attack stat. You see, ever since I started playing Palworld, I've seen many claims that the attack stat was useless to invest into. And as someone who loves crunching numbers in every game I play, I found the claim a little bit odd. Because of my hopeless inability to manage pets, I had messed around a lot with player-centric builds in Palworld and never found it to be lacking in terms of player damage. I mean, sure, in the early to mid-game, HP definitely feels more important for survivability, but honestly, that's usually the case in most games in the early game. But to say attack is just outright useless, I thought maybe I was missing something, maybe attacks work differently in this game. We'll see how it goes. Well, I've seen how it goes and I've tested about as much as I could in the hours I had available to me. I bred a fair few highly optimized combat pals to try them out. I worked on optimizing my player-based builds and my gear. And after some 120 hours or so, my conclusion is that most folks making those claims about attack being useless probably made them before reaching the late game. Or maybe they just swore off using attack midway through and then never properly played a player-based damage build in the late game. So before I explain the attack stat, let's briefly go over how player damage works in Palworld. Now this isn't the primary focus of the video, but I think it's important to at least understand how player damage works in the game when we start talking about the player attack stat. Quick disclaimer, I've done a lot of testing, but not nearly enough to provide you with precise concrete formulas or spreadsheets like I did after hundreds and hundreds of hours in Genshin. It's been a busy start of the year, and with Chinese New Year this weekend, I just don't have the time to do that at the moment. That said, I have tested things enough to be pretty confident about how stuff works in general. So player damage is calculated by taking your weapon damage, multiplied by your attack stat, then dividing that by the target's defense. There is then a variance formula applied to the result, and this variance looks to be plus or minus 10 or 15%. And let's call the final result your base damage. Base damage is then affected by two additional things. A, the target's level, and B, whether the target is a boss or an alpha. For the sake of simplicity, an alpha and a boss are interchangeable here. Now, if the target is the same level as you and is not a boss, the base damage is what you'll deal to the target. On the other hand, if the target is not the same level as you, another multiplier is added to the mix. As the target's level decreases compared to your level, the base damage dealt is proportionally increased. As the target's level increases compared to your level, the base damage dealt is proportionally decreased. While I don't know where the level differential caps out, it does seem like targets much lower level than you can take up to 4 or 5 times more damage, and targets much higher level than you can take as little as 20% of the total damage. And let's call this the final damage dealt. Now next we have bosses, and bosses add a completely different multiplier to your damage. This multiplier reduces your base damage by about 90% if the boss is the same level as you, meaning a boss only takes about 10% of the damage you would otherwise deal to a non-boss pal of the same type and level. From here, just like the level formula, you'll then deal increased or decreased damage depending on the level of the boss in relation to your level. Okay, so that's how player damage is calculated. I hope that wasn't too complicated. So, how does the player attack stat work? Now that's actually quite simple in comparison. Think of the attack stat as a percentage of weapon damage. Literally, just add a percentage sign behind your attack value in the stat screen and that's exactly what it does. Attack has a base value of 100, meaning you deal 100% of your weapon's damage in calculation. Now this is 100% of, by the way, not 100% more. Consequently, having 150 attack means you deal 150% of your weapon damage. In other words, you deal 50% more damage. Having 200 attack then means you deal twice the damage, and so on and so forth. But you might say, Crush, every point in the attack stat only adds 2 points to the attack value. That's tiny. Sure, when taken in isolation, 2 is a tiny number, but that's 2% in its own multiplicative damage pool. Attack being a percent multiplier of weapon damage means it gets more effective the higher the base damage of the weapon, and there is a stark difference between the starter or low-level weapons versus the ones you unlock later on. Additionally, with the higher tier schematics for every weapon that you can find out in the open world and from bosses, when crafting the legendary version of the weapon, it drastically increases the damage versus the base version. Now on top of this, and arguably more important in this equation, is how the attack stat interacts with the other attack boosting effects like the Vanguard passive or the attack pendant. These effects multiply the attack stat, which basically increases the value of every point invested into the attack stat. Here's an example to help explain things. Assuming you don't have any attack buffs, adding 25 points into attack gives you 50 more attack, 2 attack per point. This, as we know, increases damage by 50%. Now, add a full team of 5 pals with the Vanguard passive, and you now have a chunky 50% bonus to your attack. Now your attack value is 225, which works out to 125% more damage. In other words, with a full 5 stacks of Vanguard, each point you put into the attack stat is now worth 3 attack or 3% damage. And of course we have the attack pendant, which works exactly the same way as Vanguard, adding 5, 10 or 15% more attack depending on the quality of the pendant. Meaning if you had a blue quality attack pendant with 5 stacks of Vanguard, now every point in attack increases your damage by 3.3%. Going back to the same example, with 25 points into attack and nothing else, that's 50% more damage. That's it. Simple formula. Now add Vanguard and the attack pendant to that equation and you get a total of 247.5 attack, which is then rounded off by the game stat screen. That's 147.5% more damage, or in English, you deal 2.5 times your base damage. It is precisely this multiplicative interaction that we see between attack and other buffs like Vanguard that is really important here, because neither the additional attack stat, nor Vanguard, nor the attack pendant are actually worth using on their own. They only get very strong when everything is used together. Well, okay, for this purpose, the attack pendant is kind of an optional bonus. Really what we're looking at here is adding points into attack accompanied with using Vanguard. Now, further to all of this, you can enhance the attack equation even more with some other effects, like the bonus weak point damage granted by either riding a Vanworm or fighting alongside a Robin Quill. Now, to my knowledge, the partner skills that add bonus elemental damage don't really benefit this setup as much, because I think they add the bonus damage based off of your base attack value rather than final attack value, whereas bonus weak point damage applies to your final damage value. Now, I haven't done a lot of testing with elemental damage partner skills, but suffice it to say, in the small amount of testing I did with a 4-star Anubis, the bonus ground damage granted by its partner skill is almost completely negligible to me, even to targets weak to ground damage. The weak point bonus from the Vanworm or the Robin Quill, on the other hand, that is extremely noticeable. Of course, in the examples used in this video, I only assume adding 25 points into attack. I personally actually have 30 points added, but I also don't have a blue attack pendant, mine is green. I'm also considering giving up even more of my HP for more attack, cause with 5 stacks of Stronghold Strategists, I barely take any damage as it stands anyway, so we'll see how that goes. Now, quick note on building for player damage. You honestly don't just want to be running any team with Vanguard and Stronghold Strategist. Keep in mind, because of Vanguard and Stronghold Strategist, you are running every PAL with 2 less PAL-specific damage passives. So you really want a setup that gears more toward boosting your own damage output rather than one that relies on the PALs to deal the bulk of the damage. So to that end, I recommend running at least a couple of passive damage PALs, like the Daydream or the Dazzy, or both. Plus, of course, running something like a Robin Quill if you want bonus weak point damage, whatever suits your fancy. I've personally tried almost every combination with respect to this. I've run 4 Daydreams with a mount, 4 Dazzies with a mount, 2 Daydreams and 2 Dazzies with a mount, and a combination of 3 of them with a Robin Quill, and my favorite combination has to be the one with the Robin Quill, and I just gun for those hit shots. The Robin Quill itself isn't a slouch for damage either, so I guess it all works out pretty well. And that's it for today's video, folks. So in conclusion, I am of the opinion that the attack stat is not actually a useless stat. It is very much a viable stat to invest into, assuming you build around it purposefully. As always, thumbs up if you liked it, sub if you want to see more videos, and for my Chinese folk out there, Happy Chinese New Year, Gong Xi Fa Cai, may the Year of the Dragon be a mighty one for you. I'll catch you in the next one, folks.